Welcome back to Echo Ridge and our mini base playthrough, where I'm not sure if there's more carbon dioxide or tears filling this colony. Yes, the scaldings have continued no matter what I do to the morale. I have rebuilt just about every building on this level. You can see that we switched the atmosuit locations with the transformer and the carbon skimmer to no avail. Now, instead of getting scalded here, they're getting scalded here. Their other favorite place to get scalded is right here in this location. It just so happened that we had our live stream yesterday on twitch.tv/Echo Ridge Gaming, and at the end of the stream, we went and took a look at Mini Base and started developing some theories on where all the scaldings are coming from. We tried a few things here and there, for instance, deconstructing all the atmosuit docks and rebuilding them. No luck. The best theory that was discussed was it could be perhaps there's so much carbon dioxide in this room that when steam is in here, it's sort of teleporting out. And this would somewhat make sense because the scaldings are only usually here and here. I'm not 100% sure. I have spent too many hours trying to investigate it, so in the end, I'm sort of trying everything. We have an atmos sensor here connected to a gas pump, and whenever the atmos sensor detects that there's more than 20 kilos of pressure in this room, the gas pump will start taking it all and sending it out to the vacuum of space. Additionally, to help combat the carbon dioxide inside the brick, we've also put the Slickster Ranch back in, except this one's even better. We had to wait a little while for the printing pod to give us some larva eggs, but once it did, we quickly threw it into an incubator and now we have baby Slickster larvae. Until they start laying some molten eggs, it's going to be all crude oil, not a big deal. The liquid pump's going to take the crude oil, put it in the liquid reservoir, and then transfer it over to the oil refinery. Once that oil refinery turns all that crude oil into petroleum, it's going to be sent off to our second buffer tank in the petroleum line. Once we do start getting molten slicksters, we'll just remove the oil refinery and the liquid reservoir and let all the petroleum go to the buffer tank, which will then feed the petroleum generators. Additionally, one of the problems is you can see that they love to hang out here for some reason. Why, Eric? Why? Now, Eric is idle and not necessarily in their downtime. For their downtime, though, we've added a specific recreation room. Unfortunately, they don't exactly like to hang out here very much. In fact, this is only the second time I've seen somebody get a bottle of soda from this wonderful little recreation room. I mean, look at the beautiful decor! And we even added a nice little saxophone, and even the still life with barbecue and frostbun painting. Truly an exquisite piece of art. But yeah, the recreation room stays empty most of the time. But for today's primary mission, it's going to be starting the setup of the liquid hydrogen and the liquid oxygen. Well, that and continuously sending people to triage cots. The system I'm sort of thinking about requires us to move this tank. We don't necessarily need this much water, for one, so we're just going to move it up here. Second, this little area here is a perfect location for a bunch of steam turbines. Additionally, we'll be able to put some thermo aqua tuners in a spot just like this. I'm thinking 3 of them are going to be necessary. And from there, we'll have some sort of reservoirs where we're going to be able to create the liquid oxygen and the liquid hydrogen. Unfortunately, this means that our buffer tanks are going to have to move. I know, I don't like getting rid of buffer tanks any more than you do. So we're going to try to move some of them up here, which I think is going to require moving some of these radiant liquid pipes around. The next problem associated with this is actually the oxygen cooling, but I think I have a plan around that, so we'll see. What is it, Squishat? Just tell me what's scalding you. We're also going to be continuously sending Ed and the rocket back out to this carbon asteroid for one specific reason. In order to make this whole thing work, it requires supercoolant, and this planetoid has fullerene. Now, we have not made a trip here yet. I've been too busy grabbing a bunch of niobium and isoresin. But if we discover that trace amounts are just a little bit too trace, we're going to have to seek out fullerene elsewhere. Luckily, supercoolant only requires 1 kilo worth of fullerene to create 100 kilos worth of supercoolant. Not shabby, I'm just not exactly sure what it means by trace amounts. So step 1, I suppose, as painful as this is going to be, is getting rid of all these wonderful buffer tanks. Don't worry, the water's not going to go anywhere, because once we destroy the buffer tanks, they're going to take all those bottles of polluted water and put them into these bottle emptiers. Speaking of which, we may actually be able to do without some of the buffer tanks. We only have another 11 cycles until this vent becomes active, and you can see we've only used 1.5 of the buffer tanks. This is probably due to the fact that we're creating a lot of polluted water here. Additionally, all the polluted water being created by the petroleum engines is flashing into steam, in which case this steam turbine is then taking it, turning it into water, which is also supplementing our total water requirements. So maybe we save the space and just get rid of the buffer tanks? Now, during this whole process, we still need the polluted water to flow. And unfortunately, it's going to require us moving a lot of liquid pipes around. But I suppose if we no longer need the cooling being provided to this water, because that's going to be taken care of by the polluted water cooling loop that we've been running for a couple hundred cycles, we can just take this polluted water and feed it right to the sieve. Wow, that's going to save a lot of piping. In fact, we can join the pipes right about here now. Once this water's drained, this polluted water will just go straight up to the bristle blossoms, and whatever's extra will just circle around and go into the water sieve, which means all the polluted water pipes from here all the way over here can all go away. In other sad news, I don't know when it happened, but our wonderful sage hatch is gone. I have no idea what happened to the little guy, because this incubator is supposed to take any and all sage hatchling eggs, which means there's always supposed to be a sage hatchling in reserve. Looks like we're going to have to wait for the printing pod to give us another hatch. While the dupes are working on that, I wanted to show you another weird little bug. Remember, we are using an auto sweeper here to move our oxalite into the solid oxidizer tank. No big deal. We have it set at 900 kilos, and you'll see that I put an automation switch on it to activate it. Because after it fills with its 900 kilos, well, the auto sweeper doesn't want to stop and keeps delivering 10 grams at a time. Not sure what's up with this, so I just put an automation switch in here, which just disables the auto sweeper. Unfortunately, the auto sweeper now remembers that it was delivering 10 grams. So the next time the rocket comes back and I go to fill the solid oxidizer tank, it will only fill 10 grams at a time, in which I have to restart again. Let's see if we can get Ed out of here before another meteor shower happens, huh? Now you might wondering why I was only loading up with 900 kilos of oxalite. Remember what I told you? No matter how much oxalite you load into that thing, it doesn't come back with any? Well, since we're only going to the 10,000 kilometer ring, I've been trying only to use 900 kilos worth of petroleum and 900 kilos worth of oxalite. Alright, we've gotten most of the pipes rerouted. The only polluted water coming from this side is the occasional polluted water that doesn't actually flash into steam. That's going to change here in a little bit too, because of the system I'm thinking about for our thermo aqua tuners. Otherwise, I think it's time to move all this water up here. Now, as you can see, all of this water isn't going to fit in here. We have a couple of options. One, we can just dump it to the vacuum of space, or put it all down here, let it flash into steam, and let the steam go into the vacuum of space, or we could put it into buffer tanks. I'm sure you already know which way I'm leaning. Our water is slowly draining, and you might be wondering why we even care about this little bit of water. Well, to tell you the truth, we won't for much longer. The only reason left that we need cleaned, bottled water is for the rest of research. I suppose while we're waiting on databanks, we can go ahead and knock out the novice and the advanced out of the liquid and gas cargo as well. Ed's back from their fullerene run, and we were given 940 grams, which is going to be enough for 0 kilos worth of supercoolant. I'm not sure if I want to play that game or not. We could send a few rockets back to that same carbon asteroid, but I think I'd rather find a better source somewhere on the star map. I am going to want to save a little bit of this water because it's going to be perfect for the steam bath for our thermo aqua tuners. Unfortunately, we're not going to end up moving any of these pacu. Sorry guys. It wasn't a lot, but the pacu fillets really help supplement the food. In fact, we have over 28,000 calories sitting in our deep freezer. The first stage of our prep is going to be to fill in right below these insulated tiles with a bunch of granite tiles. Then we're going to end up putting another row of tiles down here, and so on and so forth until we have a nice little chamber here. Then we're going to open it up from the other side and allow this water to drop and then deconstruct these tiles. The reason why we're doing it specifically that way is we don't want all this carbon dioxide to end up transferring to this room here, because you'd be very surprised how far, I'm guessing 1,000 kilos worth of carbon dioxide would go throughout this colony. It would end up being one of those bad news bears sort of situations. Ooh, look at our nice rocket silo. I mean, it's definitely one way to do it. The steam is escaping to the vacuum of space as quickly as possible. I also just realized that this room here is only 15 tiles wide. In other words, exactly wide enough for 3 steam turbines. Unfortunately, For 3 steam turbines, I sort of need 16. That way I can fit in 1 ladder run on the side. I mean, once it's working, we don't have to worry about that. Maybe we'll build everything and wait to put down the last steam turbine, and then just cross our fingers that we won't have to get down there again. Hilariously enough, even though this vent is in the vacuum of space, there's so much steam in here that the gas vent is over pressure and nothing in this pipe can empty. Let's try opening the door a little bit. I'm sure that'll accelerate the steam going away. Well, I guess you could say it does, but now instead of just the first 2 rows being over 2 kilos worth of gas pressure, now all 5 rows are over 2 kilos worth of gas pressure. Unfortunately, the oil refinery does not work in 58 kilos worth of carbon dioxide gas pressure. Well, I thought it was a good idea. Now we're gonna have to run all this oil all the way over here. Or better yet, we'll just put everything in this buffer tank, deconstruct it, and then I'll let the dupes manually take those bottles of crude oil and dump them right next to the oil well. And again, this is only until we get some molten slicksters. Remember, folks, never eradicate a species until you're absolutely sure you no longer need them. Well, you knew I had to build at least 1 buffer tank, right? All said and done, it's not too shabby. Only 52 kilos worth of steam in every tile. Well, step 1 is complete, and we need to kind of get a move on it because our oxygen's up to 67 degrees. It's not a big deal because our coolant loop will take care of it, but it's not something that we want to continue for long. Ironically enough, we haven't had a scalding in probably 4 or 5 cycles. This is compared to the cycles before it, where we were having a scalding every, I don't know, 20 seconds? I'm not exactly sure what changed. It might be that there's actually no steam in this room right now, because it's cool enough to where the polluted water's not flashing. So right now, I still have my money that it was the teleporting steam. Now to get in here and work. There's a couple of problems though. Because there's so much carbon dioxide pressure down here, as soon as we let these open and start digging through here, all this carbon dioxide is going to fall. When it does, it's going to mess around with the liquid dynamics when we put our 2 layers of liquid. Probably going to be water and salt water. We know the salt water is heavier, so it's going to have to go in first. Now, being that there's 30 tiles in here, if we put 300 kilos, we would end up with 10 kilos worth of steam pressure per tile. I'd like to go with 20. So all in all, I think we're going to put 600 kilos through this bottle emptier at one time or another. With that water now in the gap, we can go ahead and deconstruct this, and at least we'll have 1 layer in. We'll deconstruct this tile as well, and that way hopefully when we put the second layer in, the carbon dioxide will have a place to escape. Well, look at that! Absolutely beautiful. Now I'm actually thinking about 3 aqua tuners. 1 for the hydrogen, 1 for the oxygen, and 1 to keep all the steam turbines cool. I could use the oxygen coolant loop to keep the steam turbines cold, but that'd be an awfully big waste of thermals, and we don't want to end up freezing all the carbon dioxide and the oxygen that's in here. Not to mention, this is still open to the rest of the base. You know, we could use a thermal regulator instead of a thermo aqua tuner. Of course, I've tried that before, keeping steam turbines cold, and it always backfires. Not to mention, we're kind of chocked full on gas pipes anyways. The problem is we only have 2,250 kilos worth of steel, and that's not even enough for 2 thermo aqua tuners. It won't take us too long to get the rest of the lime we need for the steel, thanks to the addition of our wonderful Slickster Ranch. Speaking of which, we actually have our first couple of molten larva eggs, so we can actually remove this regular larva egg and put in the molten. You'll also notice that we have a couple of auto sweepers and some conveyor loaders, eating up a lot of our steel, mind you, because we're going to be taking all the eggs and dropping them right here. That way, eventually, there's going to be 40, 50 slicksters in this little area, all consuming more carbon dioxide. When they produce their oil or petroleum, it'll go right through the mesh tiles, in which the liquid pump will grab it and put it in one of 2 tanks. First one just holding crude oil, because we're bound to have at least a couple of slicksters messing up the works, and then the rest is going to go into a petroleum buffer tank where it will join the rest of the petroleum network. But on the steel subject, maybe there's a chance that we don't necessarily have to use steel. After all, we now have access to thermium. Let's see how much of this tungsten we can go ahead and convert and find out how much thermium we have. Alright, change 1. I think I've changed my mind on 3 thermo aqua tuners, mostly because of power. Just by creating the thermium, we managed to draw a lot on how much petroleum we had, which means we're hovering right around equilibrium for how much petroleum we have versus how much power it will create. I was also considering the fact that each one of the thermal aqua tuners is also going to need its own transformer, and I'm starting to get tight on room, especially for things like power transformers. And we already do have a coolant loop here, so why don't we just navigate through the spaghetti and have this coolant loop do the work of cooling this area as well? That shouldn't be too bad, huh? There we go. That's a lot better. We've also tied the loop in with our other polluted water run. That way we can slowly add more coolant to the line, which is needed because we added so many more pipes. Now, these radiant liquid pipes are going to be keeping the steam turbines cold, but that wouldn't have required all of this mess. The reason why we did this is because it's also going to be chilling all of the oxygen. Now, truth be told, if we left it like this, it wouldn't be too great. We're probably going to have to turn some of these gas pipes into radiant gas pipes. That way they can draw in more of the temperature over here. Another issue we have is that there's so much carbon dioxide down here, and carbon dioxide is a horrible thermal conductor. The next stage in the evolution of this system is we actually need to vacuum this whole place out. There's a small issue with that. There's 70 kilos worth of carbon dioxide in this area, and we don't exactly have the space to put a proper liquid lock here. We're going to need most of this space here for the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Insert our old friend, Visco Gel. Oh, how I've missed you. And that reminds me of another difference between vanilla and spaced out. In spaced out, you're normally not collecting rare resources at cycle 500. It normally comes a little bit later. I suppose nothing stops you from doing it a little earlier, but it just seems like there's a lot more going on in spaced out. And there she is, our beautiful Visco Gel liquid lock. I should have realized the slicksters were going to bug themselves out. I know better, and yet I do these things all the time. Give me a second to rework the slickster ranch. We found a spot for a couple of large power transformers, and we need one of them to be able to power the initial gas pump. But the general idea is that we're going to separate the liquid oxygen from the liquid hydrogen. The gases will come in, the thermal aqua tuners will chill it, and then a liquid pump will be ready to send it where it needs to go. We're not going to be ready for the hydrogen rocket this episode because we still have a lot of research to go. But it'll be nice to get this thing going. At a minimum, we'll be able to convert from solid oxidizer tank over to a liquid oxidizer tank. The issue with this is, as you can see, once we finish building this, we have to seal it in, which means we're not going to be able to get back in there. So I'm going to need to make sure I do everything right, you know, the first time. A couple of updates. The first one for you is the slickster farm that I should have created in the first place. By putting the slicksters on an island, they won't be able to reach either door, and we'll be able to sweep up all the eggs using only one auto sweeper. Now, when the slicksters produce oil and petroleum, it doesn't matter if it layers or anything like that. The slicksters won't be able to bug out by constantly pretending that they're going to be drowned. I am curious to see how this is going to work when we have both molten and slicksters in this little area. But if we put a layer of petroleum down here and it doesn't fall all the way down, it will end up drowning all of the slicksters. Not too big of a deal, but I was hoping to use all the excess slicksters to keep chewing on the carbon dioxide. Because as you can see, we're up to 77.5 kilos. And that's not even counting the fact that we have a gas pump taking out 500 grams per second. And then there is this, which is guaranteed to be a future dumpster fire. I am not brave enough yet to seal this off. I keep staring at it and going back and forth trying to figure out the mistake that I made because this was relatively simple to build. Let me walk you through it, and maybe by doing that, it'll help me find any errors. Both systems are pretty much identical, minus some pipe spaghetti. The one closest to the rocket silo is going to be the hydrogen. The hydrogen's going to come in via priority because we have a bridge here, and it's going to follow the insulated gas pipe all the way over. Speaking of which, I also want to insulate all the oxygen as well. That way the gas is only as hot as the inside of the electrolyzer and won't have to travel through the industrial brick being exposed to 100-degree temps. Furthermore, meaning that our system doesn't have to work as hard to cool it back down to its liquid component. Once the gas is dropped off, the thermal aqua tuners take control. The coolant goes through a standard aqua tuner setup, goes out, and then weaves itself around this little cavity here. We went large with the radiant liquid pipes and used thermium. For one, I don't know what else I'm going to use the thermium for, but for two, it has a massive thermal conductivity of 440. The next closest is copper at 120. So when I was posed with that dilemma, I quickly decided on thermium. Additionally, for expensive materials, we used some of that diamond that we haven't been using and built 4 temperature shift plates right in the middle. This is going to help stabilize the temperature because as this room is chilling, the liquid hydrogen is going to slowly rise. and its temps will be shared with the gas hydrogen sitting right above it. And those will be assisted by the diamond temperature shift plates. Take note that we did not put temperature shift plates all the way to the edges. If you do that, your temperature shift plate is going to start injecting temperature into your insulated tiles, which chances are would end up boogering up the works somewhere down the road. Not to mention, it's just a waste of your cooling potential. We have a couple of hydro sensors in here. One controlling when the pump is allowed to take coolant out, and the other on the high pressure gas vent. That way we can control when to let more gas in. Now these are set fairly high at 800 kilos, which we might play with depending on the density of the hydrogen and the oxygen. But the idea is once the liquid gets so high, we want to stop the gas from coming in. Otherwise, the liquid will go up above the gas vent, once again causing problems. The hydro sensor on the liquid pump is set a lot lower, to above 200. That way, we know there's at least 2 tiles of height plus 200 kilos worth of liquid before we start pumping any out. Because remember, the more liquid you have in here, the more stable the temperatures are going to be. This is going to take a very long time before we have enough liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen in order to use inside of our rockets. The oxygen won't take too long because we have a steady flow of it. The hydrogen, not so much. Mostly because we're just not creating that much. Normally with these systems, you're going to create an entire new SPOM just to support them. We don't have the space for that. Another disadvantage is we're going to be losing a lot of power from this hydrogen generator, and why don't you have NG's tune-up? Okay, here comes Jason now. Speaking of which, Jason has an absolute boss machinery skill at 20, which means our NG tune-ups last for 4.5 cycles. Well, there's the first one closed up. Might as well do the second. The reason why I'm so nervous about this is because if there is a mistake, it is a pain in the tuchus in order to fix it. We're going to leave this little area here vacuumed out, just in case we do need to get into here. Otherwise, could you imagine all this carbon dioxide and everything mixing in here? It would just be a mess. Next up, we need to make some supercoolant. We're now up to 7.4 kilos worth of fullerene. Not shabby, right? Unfortunately, that's only going to give us 700 kilos worth of supercoolant. Now, I counted the pipes just to make sure that was enough coolant, but you know how my math is. Sometimes it gets all wonky. The other 2 ingredients are gold and petroleum. The gold, you know we have plenty, and we deconstructed this liquid reservoir to give us access to an entire bucket of petroleum to start off with because we needed it for visco gel. So we're going to try cooling up 700 kilos worth of supercoolant. Once this is finished, we'll start loading up those coolant loops, which I suppose means we can start to fill these. Well, after we finish sealing it in, huh? Now, you saw me mention that the hydrogen is closer to the rocket silo than the oxygen's going to be. And the reason is pretty simple. The longer those liquids sit in pipes, the more of a chance that they're going to burst. So even in our rocket silo, we're going to end up making those pipes probably out of insulation just to get them to where they need to go with the least amount of chances of losing that valuable liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. Speaking of which, I just realized I forgot a return flow. What I mean is that normally after you finish filling up the fuel tanks, you send it back to be dropped off in here. It's not a huge deal, and it's more of an optimization, and it just means that we're going to have to closely control how much liquids we let in there, because whatever's left over is going to end up just being dumped into the rocket silo. Who am I kidding? We're actually going to get in there now. There's only 432 grams of hydrogen, so it won't take too long in order for us to vacuum it back out. Actually, I don't think it's going to be worth it. Let me show you why. Normally, I like to have buffer tanks in these little systems. That way, the liquid pump fills up the buffer tank and you have all the liquid sitting in here. It makes for a great way of storing all that extra liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, also providing sort of a thermal battery to help stabilize the temperatures. I wasn't able to put them in here though, for the simple reason there's just too many pipes in such a small area. We could have extended it by just a couple of tiles, but even going just this much wider would have only given us enough room for one buffer tank. And like I said, I wanted to keep a vacuum in here because of how precarious the systems can be, knowing that we'll eventually have to get back in. And yes, we're still getting the scaldings. And I'm starting to rule out the teleporting steam. And the reason why is because I have stared at this for cycle upon cycle, waiting for a tile of steam to appear to watch it scald the dupes, but it never happens. Additionally, if it was a tile of steam, you'd figure we'd see little puddles of water everywhere. but we don't. The closest I've been able to find is going to our temperature overlay and selecting state change. Every once in a while, you'll see one tile light up like a Christmas tree, and the little temperature spikes would only be a single tile. Now, I have not seen those little temperature spikes as often as when the dupes were getting scalded. So here's my theory. I do think there is some teleportation going on, but I think it's just in the heat map. And what I mean by that is this carbon dioxide here is 101 degrees. What would happen if the simulation messed it up and when it was figuring out the temperature of this carbon dioxide, it also made it 101 degrees? And it only did it for one single tick. It's just a theory, but it's sort of all I can figure. Everything in this playthrough seems to be more laborious the further we go. I was getting ready to take our new supercoolant and fill up these coolant lines. Well, when you don't have any place to put them, it's kind of hard to do that. So we're actually going to cut this coolant loop temporarily just to make room for a liquid pump and to load up the coolant. And there it is, our 700 kilos worth of supercoolant. All we have left is 440 grams of fullerene. And I don't want to send the rocket back out anymore. Every time we send it out, it's been cutting into our petroleum resources. Not to mention all the oxalate that it requires as well. Which it's not too big of a deal to just make more. It's just time consuming. Since we only have 700 kilos of supercoolant, we're going to be very careful. I'm going to select supercoolant, but I'm going to keep an eye on this very closely. In other words, no squirreling allowed. Something has just changed. We haven't really done anything different, but now all the scaldings are all of a sudden back. Oh, well, this kind of makes sense. Except where did the water come from? Oh, because we stopped the coolant line from flowing, so all the hot debris here is causing it to break in the pipes and then flash. Good water, you might want to move, buddy. Okay, this one's on me. This one's on me. Apparently, I miscounted the pipes because we only got about 2 bottles worth of supercoolant inside this loop. Hey, that's good news for us. Extra supercoolant is always welcome. All right, I've realized why this happens to me. It's karma. Because I let all the dupes get scalded, they put in the liquid bridges backwards. Look, I don't know what to tell you, but they're definitely backwards. See, the coolant's supposed to come in this way and then go out through here. But the dupes, clearly the dupes, put the liquid bridge in opposite. In fact, they did it twice. It's just payback. So it looks like I will be vacuuming this out anyways. And if I can recommend something to you, instead of actually just stopping your coolant loop, just allow it to bypass so it can keep flowing. That way, you know, bad things don't happen when your house of cards falls apart. And look at that, as soon as we flipped the bridge around, it started working correctly. Isn't that funny? With the coolant lines in, now we need to worry about our steam turbines, which the most difficult thing is going to be routing their exhaust lines to where they empty inside this liquid vent. It's going to be a little tricky. We're also going to have to be picking up our messes. Now, we don't really have a storage area for a supercoolant, so we're going to end up making one. We put this bottle emptier on sweep only and supercoolant, so they'll just come dump the bottles over here. Then we'll mop it up again and just leave it in bottle form. We've completed re-vacuuming out this entire area. We put everything into a canister filler. I'm hoping it ejects the 6.9 kilos worth of hydrogen in a bottle. If I remember correctly, that's how it does. The only thing that makes me concerned is I don't see the little bottle inside there. Then we're just going to take the hydrogen and dump it here, where it could head off and start chasing all the steam that escapes through the vacuum of space. Fingers crossed. Oh, shnikes. I could have at least sealed this up first, huh? Well, looks like that method won't work. So now we're just going to run a pipe and connect it to the trash that's heading to the vacuum. Second, first, the same as the first. We're finally ready to seal up the steam chamber, and here's where it's going to get a little tricky, because we're going to end up removing these plastic ladders as we go up. Unfortunately, we're going to be left with some debris down here. Look, I don't want to hear it. We've been playing a long time today. There's just going to be debris that sits there. And sadly enough, I think it's only going to be one piece of plastic ladder, because we're going to be able to grab these, but we're not going to be able to grab this one. The only chance is when we deconstruct this, if I have a plastic tile being built right here, and maybe the duplicant will grab the plastic as it's falling to be able to put it into this plastic tile. But if I were you, I wouldn't bet on that happening. Here comes Squishat, ready to deconstruct the plastic ladder. We'll put a plastic tile right there. Let's see what we can do, Squishat. Come on, buddy. Nope. Okay, look. You can barely see it. Maybe it's a part of a new design of a steam turbine. That's what we're gonna go with. While we're waiting for this room to be vacuumed out, there's no reason why we can't make our thermal aqua tuners go vroom and start cooling down that coolant. And I know everybody's interested to look at the spaghetti behind the steam turbines. This is kind of like macaroni with thin spaghetti going through it. Now the good thing with the thermal aqua tuners, this steam turbine is generating 650 watts. This one here, 460. The last one, about 340. So the steam turbines themselves are providing the power for at least one of the thermal aqua tuners. If we get this room hot enough, the 3 steam turbines could actually provide power for both of them. This one's already up over 820 watts. Absolutely glorious. Now, since we have some time because this gas pump is taking an absolute forever to get rid of all this hydrogen, we're starting off with the hydrogen set at minus 254. Now, hydrogen is the tricky one because it turns back into a gas at minus 252, but turns into a solid at minus 259. So just a little bit of wiggle room. This will definitely take some tinkering. Oxygen, much easier. It turns into a liquid around 183 and doesn't turn into a solid until it hits about minus 220. So we have our set at minus 195. I just realized while we're vacuuming this out, I can actually seal the hydrogen in this room. We want hydrogen in there. In fact, it's already getting so cold that we've got solid hydrogen. This is going to happen until you get everything regulated, because there's not enough gas or liquid in here to sort of stabilize it. We'll fix that in just a minute. And just like that, it's raining hydrogen and it's starting to rain some oxygen. Now you can see some of the gas is condensing and then turning into a liquid. And it'll keep fluctuating back and forth with the liquid turning right back into a gas. And this happens for a couple of reasons. First, your coolant fluctuates a lot in temperature as it's being cooled down. Remember, our target temp is minus 254. But if something comes in at minus 253, the thermal aqua tuner is going to try to chill it by 14 degrees, which will then make the supercoolant much colder than the hydrogen can handle, hence the reason why you have some that are solidified. But the more gas and the more liquid you put in here, the more stable this container will become. Same thing here with the oxygen. We just went to our second tile worth of height for hydrogen, and we just passed the third tile of height for our oxygen. Pretty soon, this hydro sensor that's now been updated, considering the density of liquid oxygen causes it to form a tile at 505 kilos. So we updated the hydro sensor to say 450. Once that tile gets above 450 kilos worth of liquid pressure, it'll turn off this high pressure gas vent. The hydrogen's density causes it to form a tile at 1000 kilos, so we put the hydro sensor to send a green signal as long as it's below 900. I mean, we're just about at the point where the pump's going to be allowed to deliver liquid oxygen. We don't want that yet though, because we still have a little bit of research to do before we unlock our hydrogen rocket. I've also decided I want to put one more piece of automation in here, except I'm going to be slick and wait for the vent to turn off and for both of these to be vacuumed out. Long story short, I want to put an AND gate and a switch. That way I can turn off the pump whenever we're done using it. Look, you didn't think I was going to get it right on the first try, did you? But that's going to do it for now, because I've been at this episode for entirely too long. I hope you're still enjoying the series, even though it's about to come to a close. And believe me, I know you're going to love the next series. So until next time, happy gaming, and I'll talk to you soon. Yeah, something is seriously wrong with this simulation. They just keep running back and forth. They look really cute though.